Hi, 315 number. Are you there? This is Ken.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Emily.
Folks are coming.
Oh, good. Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah. And
We
can I
got
ask?
stuck.
Can I ask the 315 number? Can you give me your name, please? You just muted. You were unmuted. Can you unmute? Or do I have to unmute him?
I think he should be able to unmute.
And I didn't notice. Was Brian on the call today? Brian Woods, was he on the call today? Because I know I got a message that he was on vacation and it said on or through April 4th. So I don't know um if that meant he's here or not, but I guess he's either here or he's not.
I did not see him on the call.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I guess that is us then. Um, but Emily, you're actually on my list, you're on the credit ownership one. I mean, we're glad to have you.
So I think Catherine just didn't know if she could put Dave as a participating
Okay. Okay.
person. So Dave's on credit ownership. I'm actually not going to participate in this. I just don't have the
Well,
technical
I,
expertise. So for your
no,
awareness, I'm
as you
just
heard me say, I'm not going to accept that. We
okay.
are all going to participate. This topic.
I was gonna
Um,
say that as I'm gonna monitor how this
yeah.
meeting goes,
Okay.
and we have Adam Sherman from DEIC, who's a woody
Yeah.
matter expert, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
pull him in when the conversation starts to steer that way in future breakout groups.
Yeah.
But so he'll pop in as a participant when it's appropriate. But as we're just getting started, I thought I'd share that.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, just a
So,
note, I think they're still adding quite a few people to the group, so we should probably, before we get into any substance, we should probably wait like a couple minutes. It's
okay.
moving slow over there.
And before we get started, I do have to apologize. I have a hard stop at what is it, 11:45 your time.
Okay. Okay.
I need to move on to a panel that I'm going to be on. So But thanks again for putting this together. Really appreciate it. Good starting point for our discussion.
Yeah, and Floyd, do keep close to your whatever it is that's recording your voice, because you fade in and out, and it's not just moving your head. I don't know what it is, but it fades in and out.
I'm a Apple user, and when I switch over to Windows, I get these issues. So I don't know.
Yeah, you're being punished. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
being
you're being punished, right?
I have taken it to heart, and I've gone on Amazon and ordered a new microphone.
Okay.
That'll be addressed.
Well, we'll let you know if you drop out.
All right, and I'm leaning closer, as you can
Okay.
tell.
So I see a Jeffrey Gardner. Can I get who are you, Jeffrey? Just so I know who we have.
I'm a member of the public and a party pro se.
Okay, what's your main interest?
My main interest is both in credit ownership and in biofuels.
Okay, thanks for joining us. So Jeff, is it Jeff or Jeffrey?
Either way is fine.
Okay, because what the other members on this call received a 2-page, we'll call it a starting point. And I'd like to share that with you, but I'm not sure I know how. Is anybody here? Does anybody know how I can do that?
I can just pull it up on the screen. It looks like I have permissions for that.
Okay. And
Well, sorry, is this a person who's calling in on the phone?
No,
No, I'm right here.
Yeah, I see his name, which
I can put my email on the chat if you want to email it to me.
oh yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Should we get started since Floyd has to leave in 15 minutes?
Sure.
And
Sure.
I'd say I don't know if there's any stage setting or stuff like that we need to do,
Yeah,
but would love to hear Floyd's thoughts before he gets to leave. So
yeah, and
Floyd.
I want to kind of tee up a few questions that I think will just help us generally, because so this group is called Biofuels. First of all, I need help with language. First, in my participation in these discussions, the term biofuels sometimes is focused on the liquid biofuels, which then leads to the other language issue I have. What is biodiesel? What is renewable diesel? Can someone provide me and us a little bit of that language so that when I'm using terms and when we're using terms, we're using them consistently?
I
Start.
throw out that we call this group bioenergy. Seems like the broadest umbrella to me. A biofuel to me is a liquid fuel. And then renewable and diesel and biodiesel, I think of as those are distinct products that we should refer to separately.
Yeah, I would agree with Patrick's suggestion to broaden this to bioenergy. I think that's appropriate. I'm happy to take a crack at revising the part of your starting paper referring to biodiesel. There's a number of inaccuracies there. I don't think that was intended, but happy to take a look at that and kind of make it more accurate. I mean, just for your purposes, Dan, biodiesel and renewable diesel are liquid petroleum diesel replacements, and they use the exact same feedstocks. So waste lipids, used cooking oil, rendered tallow, inedible corn oil, that sort of thing. And they also use plant-based oilseed lipids. They're produced in different ways. Renewable diesel is more of a refinery type process, large scale. Biodiesel is a smaller scale, but they're both equally useful in diesel powered engines, and to in California specifically, that they replaced 60% of the diesel fuel in California under the low carbon fuel standard. They're now 30%.
So Floyd, where my background is on this is up here. We have the producer over in Plainfield, and my understanding that I can't, even though I'm a chemist, I can't describe it specifically, but it yields a fatty acid product, which is the reason why it gels at low temperature. And it's the reason why when you put it into a tank, it mobilizes sludges. And as I understand, that is a different chemical product than the stuff that goes through refineries, which, as I understand it, is absolutely substitutable. So is there a term for that stuff?
Yeah.
That again, the guy in Plainfield makes it from waste food greases. Is there a term for that stuff?
Yeah.
Or am I entirely wrong here?
No, you're on the right track. So what you're referring to is fatty acid methyl esters. So biodiesel is made from a process called transesterification. You're basically reacting the lipids with an alcohol like methanol and a catalyst, in the presence of a catalyst, and you're producing the FAME, fatty acid methyl esters, along with glycerin and other sort of, but those are your two main products. And then renewable diesel, again, using the same feedstocks, you're putting it through hydrogenation and refinery type processes. So it ends up just being organic chain molecules, similar, within the range of petroleum diesel. So it looks like diesel, it's treated like diesel, but you can certainly blend the two. And there's a whole lot of people on the West Coast that are blending renewable diesel and biodiesel. They complement each other. They provide different properties. To your point about gelling, that is not an issue specific to biodiesel. You can get petroleum diesel to gel as well. It's a matter of either putting in the proper additives to prevent that, to improve cold flow properties, or you can do what's called distilled biodiesel, which will address that. So there's a number of things you could do to mitigate that. Does that help?
That does. Thank you very much. And I may still need help with language as we keep going, but I'm going to try to learn.
Like I said, I'm happy to help there.
Yeah.
Ken, I'm also happy to provide maybe just a brief overview of biogas and biomethane and how we sort of view that similarly for the group, especially because we have quite a few folks here on the breakout group. So what we're focused on as an industry, and Patrick, feel free to jump in here anytime. We take a waste feedstock, right, that produces a mixture of around 50-50 methane and CO2. That's called biogas or raw biogas sometimes. That can be used to generate electricity, right? So you'll see that at landfill gas capture facilities. You'll see it at anaerobic digesters that process animal manure or food waste or wastewater. What we're really focused on here is basically refining that raw biogas into a product that is similar to how biodiesel and renewable diesel replace fossil diesel. We are a fully fungible replacement for fossil-derived natural gas. So it's a renewable methane. When it's combusted, the CO2 emissions are carbon neutral versus the similar emissions from fossil fuels, which we can get into that as part of this group, I assume. So we're something that can go into the natural gas pipeline and be a clean heat solution alongside these other solutions, especially as a really strong near-term methane reduction strategy and energy strategy for sectors that currently use natural gas.
And And I just want to add, I know, Ken, you mentioned this when you sent out this document, but I think just, yeah, the biogas, renewable natural gas is the bioenergy that I think is just missing, is the broad category of bioenergy that I think is missing from this document so far.
It absolutely is. And I won't apologize, but I will rationalize. When this started, this group was just going to be on woody biomass. And I was asked to include the liquid biofuels part. And yes, but it's so clear from the participation that we will also include the renewable natural gas and all of its language derivatives in this discussion, because, and I want to kind of get at one of our first overarching questions, and it was raised in preparation of this meeting. A lot of this has to do with boundary issues. And I'll just use my wood example. You know, the inventory, as probably know, largely restricts impacts to Vermont, but doesn't entirely. I mean, we need to learn, and I want to bring in Colin Smythe at some point, because the electricity sector of the inventory includes the generation of electricity outside of Vermont and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. So that's the one part of the inventory that goes outside of Vermont. So what we're going to need to ask, or whatever our product is as we go through the different bioenergy sources, to what extent do we attempt to use the same approach that's used for electricity, or is there reason to stick with the strict boundaries? And again, I want to use the woody biomass as an example. Cordwood, because almost by law, you're not supposed to move cordwood around a lot. So you're really not supposed to move cordwood from outside of Vermont into Vermont to burn it. Therefore, the combustion that takes place, the carbon dioxide releases in Vermont, are reflected in the forest portion of the land use component. The extent to which forests lose their carbon by harvesting, and that portion of the harvest goes to combustion, that is included in the inventory. And I know we can have a discussion whether that's appropriate and correct or accurate, but at least that's how it's structured, which is very different than wood pellets. Most wood pellets in Vermont are not made in Vermont. Therefore, the wood source is not Vermont. And that, which means that the combustion that takes place in Vermont is not balanced by, or not measured by, a reduction in the forestry component of carbon. So, and again, we can go through each of the different woody biomass fuels and identify that, hey, there's a difference. So that's one of the things. So it is this boundary issue. And I heard one of the comments leading to this meeting was, when we think of renewable natural gas, to the extent that's taking place outside of Vermont, then what you're doing is that what you're using as a feedstock may in itself, if it didn't go through the natural gas formation process for digestion, fermentation, whatever, then it would have had a release that is not, it is a counterfactual, that would therefore need to be balanced, but it's happening outside Vermont. So we're going to have to determine how do we address those out-of-state factors. So again, I'm just leaving that out there as one of these general topics that we're going to have to help the PUC and the consultants, and work with the consultants to make sure that we're very clear about how that boundary issue is addressed. Sam, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, and thanks for the background there. Just not to step too far back, but just as a matter of maybe process here, do you think, and does the group think that it would make sense in terms of what we're trying to come up with as a product, right? If we were to lay out the different questions which we expect will need to be addressed by the tag and by the commission as part of the carbon accounting piece of this. If we lay those out into a document and then perhaps provide a rationale for why they should make a certain decision, or just even a rationale as to here are the decision options, right? Maybe if, you know, in some PUC processes, right, decision options are known to folks in that world. So I'm wondering, I mean, you know, some of those questions are listed here, right? But to your point that you just made around carbon accounting and the boundaries for carbon accounting, I mean, one of the fundamental questions, right, is how do the life cycle carbon intensity scores, where things occur outside of state, factor then into, or align with, I should say, the state's inventory, right? So that could essentially be a question, and we could answer that by saying, well, you could do it this way, or you could do it that way, or maybe there's only really one way to do it. And I think there is a pretty well-established way of doing that, right? And then provide examples. So you could say, well, look, this is how, you know, Oregon does it, right? Just random example. Does that feel like an approach that makes sense to folks in terms of like how we can actually present this back to the tag and to the rest of the folks involved?
And I'll just jump in quickly and say yes to most of that, but I think we should stop, especially in the early products that we deliver to the tag. We'll stop with the options, and then we can have within our deliberations recommendations, but I would like us to start with the questions and the options, and allow, because one of the things we have to recognize is the full tag has to participate in that point where we get to recommendations. We're not allowed to do that because we don't follow all of the rules of public meeting. So anyway, so I agree 98% of what you're saying, but I'd like us to leave it at the short term with options, and maybe the full tag will send us with an assignment to flesh some of those options out and come up with a little bit more recommendation.
Sure. And if I can just, sorry, Floyd, if I can just clarify quickly, I think with the idea of options, right? I mean, basically they're looking for technical guidance as to, you know, what's the available science behind how you do this, right? The available science and existing policy precedent resulting from that science. And I think, you know, that sort of will imply options in and of itself. If we don't want to lay them out as specific options, that's fine. But I think like ultimately the options, so to speak, will be clear based on whatever we provide in the document.
Thank you, Sam. Floyd?
Yeah, real quick, and I do have to drop off in a minute. Most everything
Speak close.
I agree with most everything that was said earlier. I guess my suggestion as we move forward on this is to kind of take a step back and just really just ask ourselves, what is the best thing for climate and the atmosphere, right? The pollutants we're talking about, carbon wise, they are global pollutants, right? Which is really helpful in terms of, you know, thinking about these kind of artificial distinctions out of state, within state. In my mind, it doesn't really matter if it gets up into the atmosphere or it gets pulled out of the atmosphere. It's helping, you know, it's helping or adversely affecting the atmosphere, whichever way it's going. So we really need to take a broader look at, you know, what is reducing these global pollutants, and what are the policies or strategies that can maximize those reductions. So in my mind, I think we should look at the science first, look at it from a objective life cycle basis, put aside the politics, the statute, things like that, and just look at it from a straight science basis, and look at the life cycle. And then that can help inform, you know, the sort of deliberations we have to go through.
Thank you, Floyd.
All right. I need to go, so I'll see you guys later.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
If it's all right with folks, I wanted to bring up see if I can get it here, the agenda, because there's specific questions they wanted us to discuss right now, and since we only have 20 minutes left, thought maybe we should start to chip away at those. So like what are the key questions that need to be answered? What can we move on? Identify the information that the tag needs to answer the questions. And so I think I would start here with this first one, and see if we can start to make a list of these.
I'm in favor. Consistent with what Sam mentioned too. Let's come up with some of the specific questions.
Patrick, are you or Ken, are you recording the questions? I mean, I could do it also. Just want to make sure that someone is.
I am glad to have someone else do it.
I am recording for my own sake, so happy to share out.
Thanks, Emily. I think that would be really helpful. And if you don't mind, since we're trying to answer these bullets here and maybe the next, 15 minutes or so, it could be a short list of just, hey, these are the questions that the group came up with to start. And I think from my viewpoint, right, and not to gloss over, I think the wood waste accounting problem is important here. I'm not an expert on, or wood in general, sorry, not just wood waste. I'm not an expert on woody biomass. I do think that the number one question we'll need to answer in this group is, how does life cycle accounting overlap? How does the life cycle accounting that will be used in the program, right? Because we know that it will be used in the program, overlap with the state inventory, right? How to reconcile those things. Number two could be something along the lines of carbon accounting for wood-based energy resources, right? I don't know if anyone has I mean, I think those are, we can certainly provide background information. I think those are the only two things that are really questions, right? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
And I'm sorry for not raising my hand. When I'm screen sharing, I don't think I can raise my hand, or at least.
All right, your hand is raised.
My hand is raised.
Yeah,
when I'm screen
you're
sharing,
in.
I don't know how to unraise it. So those buttons aren't visible. So I apologize. I can add a couple other questions, which are especially starting with wood heat. And I'm not an expert on wood heat. We do have a wood pellet boiler at home. And it was interesting to put on my greenhouse gas accountant hat before we decided to purchase that, and after, and think about what the implications of our own heating at home are. But I think the big question with wood heat and how it's handled in the inventory, or one of the big questions, sorry, two big questions. How are biogenic emissions going to be handled? There has been I have my own opinions about it, but I'm going to set those aside and just try to summarize the question. For many years, biogenic emissions have generally been excluded, and some policies are wanting to include them in the accounting. I believe New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act did that. So I think that's a big question that needs to be addressed. And I think the consultant has proposed looking at it in both ways, but I'm not certain of that. I think for wood heat, and sorry, that biogenic question, I think goes for all of these all types of bioenergy. For wood heat in its various forms, I think a big question is, how are the details of the carbon debt of cutting down trees and burning them accounted for? I haven't kept up with the thinking on that, because that's not what I do day to day for work for the past. I haven't kept up with the thinking on that for the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, but I know that's a big question. If a tree is 40 years old and it has all this carbon in it, and you cut it down, how do you account for the fact that it's going to take 40 years to grow back? So those are a couple questions I'd throw out there.
Okay. Emily?
Not adding questions, but I'm just kind of curious, and we can answer this after if folks have more questions to add. But what the next steps might be for thinking about agenda making for the next meeting. I'm just trying to think about Adam definitely has stuff to contribute in terms of the wood question, and a lot of these are related to that, and just knowing when to pull him in. So we can come back to that, but just thought I'd put that out there as how our agenda is going to be made and how are we going to tackle these questions.
Yeah, and it's a question as to whether we will be making it before we leave here, or whether we kind of hear how the breakouts go and use some of the time in the 2 weeks to structure the next one. Because I mean, I have a couple, I'll be honest, I have a couple of assignments for us. I mean, I'll just lay one of them out, and that is the draft life cycle analysis work that's sponsored by the Agency of Natural Resources focuses on upstream accounting. And I would love this group to review, because for each of the categories, except wood, but for biodiesel and for various forms of renewable natural gas, they have upstream accounting information. And I'll say it's pretty dramatic. In other words, the numbers are pretty big. And so I would like us to review that just because it's some of the information that's circulating out there. But anyway, that's getting ahead. But that's just one of the pieces. Yeah.
Thanks, I had my hand up next. So unless someone else wants to speak, by all means. Just wanted to, I guess, maybe push back a little bit on Patrick, the question of whether or not biogenic emissions are considered carbon neutral. I think that's definitely appropriate to address, and because it will come up here, right? But there's pretty I envision that maybe being more of a summary of the literature around that. There's not really, other than sorry, I lost my train of thought. Other than wood waste, or other than wood, I keep saying waste, there's not really any serious scientific or greenhouse gas accounting body that doesn't consider the emissions as carbon neutral, right? I mean, if it's a near-term feedstock, right, versus long-term feedstock, that's the delineation there. So, before we throw that out there as a big question of well, how should we do this? I mean, all of the methodologies that are being considered seriously here, right? Like GREET, it's all carbon neutral. So, I mean, maybe that's more of just a summary. I do agree. There's a lot of misunderstanding around that. And I think it will be very key for this group to supply, I mean, just the examples I have written here, right, are Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's methodology, the International Energy Agency's methodology, World Resources Institute, EPA, right? New York is the only state that doesn't do that, and it's not scientific. So
I'm completely in agreement, and think it should be done based on the science and how the accounting is done consistent with other policies globally. And totally agree. That said, I know it's maybe I shouldn't say I know. I'm confident it's going to be an issue people ask about and bring up, and so I think the tag should provide some advice on it.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. And I actually have 2 more questions to add. One is, Sam, I appreciate you mentioning the Minnesota GREET thermal program, and I don't know if the idea I brought up before of a Vermont GREET, I don't know if there's budget for that and time for that and all those things, although I think it would be really valuable to this whole program. But especially if Minnesota has already modified GREET to be for thermal purposes, I suspect it wouldn't be very too heavy of a lift to then modify Minnesota's thermal GREET to be Vermont specific with Vermont specific emissions factors. So I think that's an important question to assess the feasibility of that. Then
Patrick,
the other,
if I can comment on that quickly, that was an exercise by eco engineers, and it's all in one of their dockets. I'm happy to share that with this group. It's sort of hidden a little bit, but basically it just entails adjusting the end use step in GREET to reflect a thermal end use, right? And you could really switch out which thermal end use that is, right? It's just that as you know, the default GREET is a transportation end use. So, I mean, you switch out the transportation end use for a thermal end use, you put in Vermont specific assumptions around electricity CI, or wherever the facility is generating the biogas for electricity supply and feedstock assumptions, and then that's your Vermont GREET, right?
Yep.
So I want to throw one thing out. This is related to the first question that you folks listed off, and that is, I would like to understand whether the current inventory, this is related to biodiesel. My understanding is there's a little bit of biodiesel in our diesel right now, in our heating oil right now. And I don't know if the inventory just looks at what I don't know what you'd call it, the sort of the tailpipe emission, the actual combustion, or do they account at all for the fact that some of that diesel is biogenic? And because it may very well be that the clean heat standard in Vermont leads to a significant increase in the composition of biodiesel. And therefore, this sort of reconciling the inventory, if the inventory doesn't account for that and just says, no, it's the same chemical product that's undergoing combustion, and therefore it's releasing the same amount of carbon dioxide, well, that would be different than using a more life cycle outside of Vermont boundary calculation. But I don't know the answer to that, and I'm hoping that we can learn the answer, because then it'll help address that one piece, which is the reconciliation of a life cycle analysis versus an inventory.
Ken, I'm still trying to understand, and I don't want us, because we only have 5 more minutes. I think just something I'd like to discuss with you, or maybe the whole tag, and it might have been in a meeting that I wasn't able to attend. I'm still trying to understand why we need to reconcile the life cycle with the inventory. To me, the tag's job is to focus on the
Yeah. Yeah.